When kindness feels heavy, have you ever sat across from someone you love sharing coffee? A casual laughingly to leave with a quiet weight in your chest. They said all the right things, smiled when they should, but something in the silence between words didn't feel quite right. An edge in their humor, a glance that lingered just a moment too long. You wonder if you're imagining it, but your body remembers what your mind tries to dismiss. Carl Jung believed that what we reject in our selvest parts, we find unacceptable, frightening, or painful don't disappear. They hide. This hidden part, the shadow, often slips out not through cruelty, but through irony. A biting joke masked as just teasing. A comment about your flaws delivered with a smile. These aren't calculated attacks. They're unconscious projections, unaccounted emotions finding shape in offhand remarks. The closer someone is to us, the more easily their shadow finds a home in our trust. When humor starts to sting more than soothe, it's worth asking gently, is this affection or a quiet way of keeping me small? This kind of irony doesn't always mean harm, but when it repeats, when it consistently pokes at what you're working to heal, it might be something more. A hidden discomfort in them, mirrored in you. Not all wounds shout, some whisper through laughter. So we pause and ask ourselves, is the connection still holding us, or has it begun to wear us down? 1. The smile behind the sting. You're recounting a small win, a promotion at work, maybe, or finally following through on a goal you've quietly nurtured. The person across from you smiles. They say that's great, but then add something else. A joke, something light but sharp. Guess they were desperate, they laugh. Or took them long enough to notice you. Everyone chuckles, even you. But later that night, alone, the words echo differently. Why does it feel like their joke landed somewhere deeper than it should have? These moments are hard to hold. On the surface, it's humor, a passing comment. You don't want to be too sensitive, but the tension you feel isn't about a single sentence. It's about a pattern, a familiar pattern. Small, needling remarks that somehow always find the soft spots. The joke that drifts just close enough to your insecurities to leave a mark, but far enough to stay harmless. Carl Jung spoke of the shadowed parts of ourselves we push down, deny, or can't fully see. When those parts remain unexamined, they don't disappear. They find a way out, often through projection. We unconsciously cast them onto others, and sometimes the person closest to us does the same. Their unresolved self-doubt or hidden envy takes the shape of sarcasm, not because they intend to hurt you, but because your growth, your light, brushes up against something they haven't made peace within themselves. Humor, in this way, can become a passive weapon. It masks discomfort as wit. It allows difficult emotions to be released without accountability. The laugh becomes a disguise, and because the words are wrapped in charm or familiarity, we're often left doubting our own reaction. Was that just teasing? Am I overthinking this? But over time, these remarks do something quiet but corrosive. They erode trust not only in the other person, but in ourselves. We begin to question our instincts. We shrink a little before we speak. We brace for the laugh that might cut. The danger here isn't in one comment, but in the way repetition wears away at the edges of safety. In a healthy bond, teasing might bring playfulness, but when humor consistently targets your effort, your dreams, your identity, it asks for pause. Not every joke is laced with resentment, but when they always land in the same vulnerable place, it may not be coincidence. So ask yourself not with judgment, but with quiet honesty. Does this person's humor make me feel seen or small? Do I laugh with them or at myself? Sometimes the answer is the beginning of something we've been trying not to know. But sometimes the harm doesn't come through words, it comes through quiet interference, dressed as concern. 2. The hand that slows you down. You tell them you've finally signed up for the class, the one you've been talking about for months, writing, coding, painting, whatever it is that feels like a step closer to yourself. They nod. That's great, they say, but their tone is slow, uncertain. Then comes the rest. Just don't burn out again. Or, are you sure that's the right time for something like that? They don't say no. They just nudge you toward doubt. You start wondering if maybe they're right. On the surface, it looks like care, a friend or partner watching out for your well-being, trying to keep you grounded. But if you pause and look closely, you might notice a quiet pattern. Each time you move toward growth, something interferes. A subtle comment that redirects your focus, a delay, a forgotten promise, advice that always urges caution rather than courage. And over time, momentum becomes harder to sustain. Carl Jung believed that the unconscious, especially the shadow, shapes our behavior in ways we rarely recognize. The shadow contains parts of ourselves we've exiled: envy, fear, inadequacy. When these parts remain unseen, they don't stay quiet. They project outward, often toward the people closest to us. And sometimes, without meaning to, someone near you begins to resist your progress, not out of cruelty, but because your movement forward stirs something unresolved in them. They might not know they're doing it. It may not be intentional, but unconsciously, your growth becomes a mirror, reflecting their own hesitation, regrets, or missed chances. To ease their discomfort, they slow you down, not with force, but with friction, encouraging you to be realistic, to wait a little longer, to question whether you're really ready. They frame it as concern, but underneath, something else is speaking. This kind of sabotage is not dramatic. It whispers. It hides behind love. And that's what makes it hard to name, because you want to believe they're on your side. You want to believe they mean well, and perhaps, in some way, they do. But when support begins to resemble resistance, it's worth looking deeper. Sometimes we sabotage what we don't understand, and sometimes we hold back those we love, and not because we wish them harm, but because we fear being left behind. So ask yourself, gently, is this guidance or hesitation in disguise? Does this person support who I am becoming, or do they only feel safe with who I used to be? The answer may be subtle, but your energy knows. And while some forms of resistance are active, others show up in the moments we need presence the most, yet find only absence. 3. When presence feels hollow. You celebrate good news. Maybe it's a job offer, a personal breakthrough, a long-awaited yes after months of waiting. You reach for the phone, send the message, expect warmth, but the reply is delayed. When it comes, it feels flat. A simple nice or glad to hear, without follow-up, without depth. Or maybe it's not a moment of joy, but a time of grief, a loss, a crisis. You reach out, and they're there, physically, sitting beside you. But their gaze drifts, their words are clipped, and you sense them waiting for the moment to pass. You begin to wonder, is it me? Am I asking too much? Carl Jung wrote that we are most ourselves in moments of intensity: birth, death, success, collapse. These are thresholds where the unconscious stirs. In genuine connection, such moments deepen bonds. But when someone who claims closeness becomes emotionally distant during them, it signals something more complex at play. Emotional absence, especially in pivotal moments, often points to a rupture within the person themselves. Jung's concept of the shadow, hidden, denied parts of the psyche, helps us understand this withdrawal. When a person cannot tolerate their own emotions, they may instinctively retreat from yours, not out of cruelty, but out of inner disconnection. Your vulnerability becomes a mirror they cannot face. Your grief reminds them of wounds they've buried. Your joy surfaces their unmet desires. The heart closes to avoid what it cannot hold. This is not always conscious. Many people move through life without realizing how numb they've become. They've learned to stay on the surface. In moments that demand depth, they simply don't show up fully. They may speak, but the words feel scripted. They may listen, but their attention slips sideways. It leaves you with a hollow echo where comfort should be. When this happens repeatedly, it becomes a kind of quiet abandonment, one not marked by doors slamming, but by silence when it mattered. Over time, it can teach you not to reach out at all, to carry your joy in private, to grieve in solitude, to shrink the size of your needs until they fit into the space you're given. But emotional connection should not feel conditional. It should not vanish when things get real. So ask yourself, not harshly, but with care, when I open up, do they move closer or away? When I need presence, do I receive attention or a placeholder? The answers may not be loud, but they matter. Because in the small spaces where we are most vulnerable, presence is not a performance site, is a form of love. And when that love is missing, something within us begins to question our worth. When emotional connection fades, It often makes room for something more covert, an unspoken rivalry beneath polite words. 4. The quiet game of comparison. You tell them you've finally finished your degree, or maybe you've started running again, or found a new rhythm in life that feels, for once, truly yours. You share it not for applause, but because it matters to you, and because they matter to you. But their response lands sideways. "Oh, that's good," they say, and then pivot. "I've actually been thinking about getting back into school too." Or, "That reminds me, I've started running again 3 miles a day." You smile, nod, but somewhere in the back of your chest, something tugs. Why does their response feel like a redirection? We all want to be seen, especially by the people we hold closest. Not just looked at, but seen without competition, without comparison. But sometimes, even in our most trusted relationships, our joy becomes a trigger. Not intentionally, not maliciously, but something gets activated, and instead of staying with your story, they veer into theirs. Over and over again, Carl Jung observed that what we cannot accept in ourselves, we often project onto others. He believed that the shadow or buried insecurities, inadequacies, fears can slip quietly into the spaces between us. When someone struggles with their own self-worth, your success may unknowingly reflect what they've avoided. Your light, even if small, may cast shadows on parts of themselves they'd rather not confront. So they reach for balance in it through support, but through silent rivalry. They don't argue. They don't dismiss you. Instead, they measure, redirect, compare. They may not even know they're doing it, but somewhere, deep down, they're trying to protect a part of themselves that feels fragile. This subtle competition doesn't always look like jealousy. It's not loud or obvious. It shows up in the way conversations always circle back to them, in the gentle corrections, in the stories that slightly outshine yours. And after a while, you begin to edit yourself. You make your joy smaller, your stories shorter. You learn, unconsciously, not to outgrow the space that was built for who you were in it, who you're becoming. These dynamics aren't always easy to name, but your body often knows first. A tightening in the stomach, a hesitation before sharing, the sense that celebration isn't quite safe here. So ask yourself, when I rise, do they rise with me or reach to level the ground beneath us? This isn't about blame, it's about awareness, because true connection holds space for more than one person's becoming. And if a relationship feels more like a race than a refuge, it may be time to pause and consider who's truly walking beside you, and who's keeping pace only to stay ahead. And when competition cannot be voiced, it sometimes takes another router shaping your story in the spaces where you cannot defend it. 5. When your story comes back to you changed, you start noticing small shifts. A friend mentions something about you that doesn't feel quite right, something you never said, or didn't say that way. Someone at work seems distant after a conversation you weren't part of, or maybe a mutual acquaintance congratulates you on something personal you hadn't shared with them. You smile politely, but inside, you feel unsettled. How did they know? And why does their version sound off? These moments are difficult to name. The facts seem close enough to the truth to be excused. A detail left out here, an emphasis added there. But something in your gut senses distortion. You begin to trace the path of the story backward, and it often leads to someone you trust. Not someone outwardly hostile, someone warm, familiar, close. Carl Jung taught that the psyche contains hidden territory as shadow, as he called it, where denied parts of ourselves live. When unacknowledged, this shadow doesn't stay quiet. It acts unconsciously, often in the form of projection. When someone carries inner conflict they cannot face, they may project it onto others, reshaping those people's stories to match their discomfort, not to destroy, but to displace. In this light, distorted information becomes a defense. A person may unconsciously reframe your life, your intentions, your choices as a way to manage their own unresolved emotions. Perhaps they envy a part of you they can't yet claim in themselves, or your authenticity challenges the version of the world they've constructed. So your story gets edited, repackaged, handed to others not as a reflection of you, but as a reflection of them. It's not always malicious. Often, they don't realize they're doing it, but the impact is real. Trust erodes slowly, not with betrayal, but with the quiet rewriting of your truth. The version of you that begins to circulate no longer feels like your own. You start to question who's actually seeing you and who is seeing a version they've created to suit their inner needs. Jung believed that truth has a weight, and when it's displaced, the psyche notices. You might feel that weight in your body, first a tightening, a distancing, an urge to pull back without knowing why. These are the signs that something sacred, your voice, your story, is being handled carelessly. So ask yourself, softly, when my name leaves their mouth, does it carry my meaning or theirs? When they speak of me, is it to understand or to explain away? If the answer leaves you uneasy, that feeling may be asking you to listen, not to accuse, not to defend, but to guard what is yours. Your narrative is not raw material for someone else's projections. It's your ground, and it deserves to be held with care. But even when no words are twisted, the silence around your joy can speak volumes too. 6. The smile that doesn't reach your joy. You share something that matters to you, a new opportunity, a moment of recognition, a small personal win that's taken months to build. You tell them with quiet excitement, expecting warmth, not applause, just presence. But the room shifts. Their expression stills. Their response is muted, mechanical. That's cool, they say, but the words land flat. There's no curiosity, no follow-up, no shared light. And suddenly, what felt alive in you starts to dim. What do we do with that silence? Not the absence of words, but the absence of felt connection. When our joy is met not with celebration, but with something cooler, withdrawn, ambiguous, we begin to wonder, did I say too much? Was I being arrogant? Was I wrong to expect more? Carl Jung wrote that what we reject in ourselves, we cannot fully welcome in others. The shadow, in Jung's terms, holds the parts of us we disenvy, shame, inadequacy, fear of irrelevance. When someone close to us hasn't made peace with these parts within themselves, they may struggle to celebrate what is blooming in us, not out of intent to harm, but because your aliveness unsettles something dormant in them. In this sense, indifference becomes a subtle defense. Their lack of enthusiasm isn't just about you, it's about the distance between where they are and where they imagine you now to be. Your forward movement touches their stillness. Your visibility reminds them of how hidden they feel. And instead of leaning in, they retreat behind neutrality, hoping that their silence will go unnoticed. But it does not go unnoticed. Not by you. Over time, the space between your joy and their reaction begins to widen. You find yourself withholding details. You downplay your pride. You carry your achievements in quiet corners because the air around them doesn't feel safe anymore. You may start to believe that it's better not to shine than to feel unseen in your light. And yet this silence is not always a sign of betrayal. Often, it's a mirror, a reflection of wounds still unnamed, of someone wrestling, perhaps unknowingly, with their own unfinished story. Still, for you, the question remains. So ask it softly. When I grow, does this person grow with me, or do they grow quiet? Not every silence is hostile, but some are heavy with meaning. If your joy feels unwelcome in the places you once felt held, you may need to ask whether those spaces are still meant for who you are becoming. Because joy, like pain, deserves company, and celebration, no matter how small, should never have to apologize for arriving. And just as joy can be left unmet, so too can pain, especially when vulnerability is met with detachment instead of care. 7. The cold room of vulnerability. You're not asking for much, just a moment of softness. Maybe you've had a hard day. Maybe something cracked open that you weren't ready for. You share it, carefully, with someone you trust. The words come slow. Maybe your voice shakes a little. You're not looking for answers, only presence. But their face shifts, a slight roll of the eyes, a quick glance at the phone, or worse, a correction, a sigh, a quiet but sharp "you're too sensitive." The space you needed for warmth becomes cold, and you wonder, did I make a mistake by opening up? Carl Jung believed that the parts of ourselves we refuse to face do not disappear, they hide, and they shape our responses to others in ways we don't recognize. In moments of vulnerability, we don't just reveal our pain. We also invite someone else to sit in theirs, and for many, that's too much. The shadowed hidden reservoir of unacknowledged wounds shrieks not with compassion, but with discomfort. When someone distances themselves in the face of your vulnerability, it is often not about your emotion at all. It is about what that emotion awakens in them. Your sadness might mirror their own buried grief. Your fear might tap into their unspoken anxieties. Your need may threaten the illusion of self-sufficiency they've spent years constructing. And so they pull back not consciously, but instinctively. What you experience as coldness may, in fact, be self-protection, a refusal to touch something fragile inside themselves. They may not say it aloud, but their body language, their timing, their carefully chosen words, these things speak. Over time, you may begin to keep your wounds to yourself. You laugh instead of cry. You explain rather than feel. You learn that in this particular relationship, only part of you is welcome, the part that doesn't ask for too much, doesn't feel too deeply. And yet, the ache doesn't go away. Because somewhere, you remember that real closeness doesn't require shrinking. That connection isn't just shared joy, but shared silence, shared hurt, shared uncertainty. So pause. Ask quietly, when I'm hurting, do they lean in or look away? Is their presence steady or conditional? The answer might not be obvious, and it may not come all at once. But if your pain feels like an inconvenience rather than something worthy of care, your heart is already trying to tell you something. In Jungian terms, the refusal to hold another's vulnerability is often a sign of one's own unheld self. But for you, the one reaching out, emotional safety is not a luxury. It is the ground upon which trust stands. Without it, even love can feel like exile. Sometimes, the absence of warmth gives way to something even more confusing, influence wrapped in the softness of love. 8. The voice that sounds like yours, but isn't. You share a plan, maybe something new, something a little uncertain, a career shift, a boundary you're learning to set, a choice that doesn't follow the script others expect of you. They listen. They nod. Then come the questions, not hostile, but persistent. Are you sure that's the right move? Do you think you're ready for that? What if it doesn't work out? It's framed as concern. Thoughtful, measured, even loving. But somehow, you leave the conversation feeling smaller, unsure, second-guessing what had once felt clear. How does care begin to feel like control? Carl Jung described the unconscious as the unseen driver of much of our behavior. Within it lives the shadowed, disowned parts of the self, including fear, insecurity, and the desire for control. When those aspects are not acknowledged, they don't disappear. They slip into our relationships, shaping how we show up for others, especially those closest to us. Sometimes, what looks like support is actually a quiet redirection of your autonomy. The person who constantly questions your decisions may not be trying to hold you back, at least not consciously. But your movement, your risks, your growing sense of self can awaken a discomfort in them, a fear that they no longer understand you, that you're becoming someone they can't predict. So they respond not with openness, but with gentle constraint. Control often doesn't arrive with shouting. It whispers in the form of advice. It presents as protection, even love. I just don't want to see you get hurt. I'm only trying to help, and you believe them. Because the tone is calm. Because they've known you a long time. Because you've trusted them before. But over time, you begin to notice something quieter. Your own voice growing faint. You ask for permission instead of checking in with yourself. You hesitate before choices that once felt natural. You begin to shrink your world to fit their comfort. Jung believed that true growth begins when we stop living by the unconscious expectations of others and reclaim our own internal compass. But doing so can feel disloyal, especially when the influence is wrapped in warmth. That's what makes it difficult. You're not being told what to do. You're just being slowly steered. So ask gently, is this guidance rooted in love or fear? Do I feel more like myself after we speak or less? The answer may reveal not just something about the other person, but something about the landscape of your own boundaries. Because real care doesn't need to reshape you. It doesn't push you back into the mold you're outgrowing. It stands beside you, even when it doesn't fully understand where you're going. And if someone's concern consistently clouds your clarity, it might be time to ask, whose life am I really living? When all of these patterns begin to echo together, the message becomes clear not about them, but about what you are being asked to notice within yourself. What lingers beneath familiar faces? You walk away from the conversation feeling heavier than before. Nothing was said directly, nothing you can point to, but something in the tone, the timing, the way your words were mature not meth has left a quiet ache. Why does connection sometimes feel lonelier than being alone? Carl Jung taught that much of what we project onto others begins as unrecognized material in ourselves. The shadow doesn't just live in strangers, it shows up in people we love, and in how they respond to our light, our wounds, our change. When someone close to you consistently resists your joy, disappears in your pain, or subtly shapes your choices under the guise of care, it's rarely a conscious betrayal. Often, it's their own unconscious trying to stay safe. But over time, the impact becomes clear. You begin to question your instincts. You grow cautious with your voice. You wonder if you're asking for too much when all you needed was to be seen. The deeper invitation here is not to label others as harmful, but to stay awake to the patterns that quietly shrink us. To notice when affection starts to feel like pressure, when humor cuts, when silence weighs, when care limits. So perhaps the question isn't do they love me, but can they hold all of me? And if not, what part of you are you leaving outside the door to keep the peace? Sometimes, healing begins not with confrontation, but with a decisione to listen to what your discomfort has been trying to say all along.